everybody, welcome to the stream.tv. We're here talking about Legion. For those of you who have finally caught up on the show, it's the day after, so you had more than like a bunch of hours to do this. I'm your guest host today, Sabina Ibarra, here with...
I'm Ray Holdridge, ready to go. Hi, Mom. I know you were adamant on me saying that.
Hi, guys. I'm Liz Finning. Liz Finning on Twitter as well, and I am wearing henna today because I just did a thing for Henna Caravan.
And it's also very like sort of otherworldly and stuff too. So I kind of think it goes with like kind of the stuff that we're talking about in today's
Spiritual
episode.
expanding your mind.
Spiritual expanding your mind sort of
thing.
thing.
And in this episode, there was a lot of that.
Very
a lot
It's very
of
Dharma
that.
initiative.
Yeah, so the episode started with, I mean, as what we could have assumed was the ending of the episode where things are hitting the fan, and it all like rewinds and starts with Jermaine Clement, who turns out to be the voice from the coffee machine. Shout out to at Engravings Films on Twitter, who pointed that out. Yeah, because like the voice did sound familiar. Like the last episode, I was like, I know that voice, and then it's Jermaine, which is amazing. And he starts off the episode in a really weird, trippy way, talking about how some stories are about empathy, those Once Upon a Time stories, and other stories about are about sort of inspiring fear, and that kind of like sets the stage for this episode. If you guys want to chime in on that.
No, well, I'll say right off the bat, I took very little notes because I was terrified.
Yeah, it's so hard because if you look down, you're like missing something.
You end up missing a glitch memory. You end up missing a line or a word that matters. And I don't think it was a coincidence that he was obviously speaking particularly of the different types of stories. I mean, he says, you know, this little bunny is going to drown in the ocean. And it's just like, sure enough, you find David on this journey in his own mind, or at least we start there in his own psyche. And I just love the way they bring in Oliver's character. And that was so interesting. And for a while there, I'm like, what?
Like, who's this?
Is he introducing to the story? And I thought it was just, okay, we're doing a narrator thing with the show now. Okay, cool. And then later on when he shows, oh no, he's in it. He's actually has this great scene with David going on. I just love the way the show started.
Yeah, well, and particularly like the kind of this Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey. So he's like, okay, there's one kind of storytelling like this, which is like the hero who goes on the journey, and then he's like the fear-based, and it's interesting because I think it's not only a story of this episode, which I think he was kind of recapping for us. It's the whole. It's all of David's story. He's someone who's going on a hero's journey. He's getting all of his comrades. He's learning and he's growing as a person, but he's also someone who's like torn to pieces. He's a bunny who gets drowned in the ocean.
Yeah,
and I also got the sense that in that sort of very groovy speech he had, Sydney was kind of Alice in Wonderland, like following the rabbit down the rabbit hole. And
they do say the Alice thing later in the episode.
And I kind of think that, like, I think they're in his head almost, like kind of like an Inception, how there are different levels of his mind in a way.
Well, even in the first part, they start talking about whether or not they're
is this real?
In a memory. Is this real?
Is
this
a memory?
Because he is so powerful. He has the ability to create and manipulate pretty much reality. And that's an insane power. It kind of makes sense, though, when they talk about how they go into his memories, but then they end up somewhere else. And they give a great explanation of it. Now they're referencing it's actually his ability to manipulate the astral plane, which makes a lot of sense because of his ability to astral project and all those kind of things. So, but now this episode really explored that concept, and even on the outside world, going to investigate the doctor's office. You know, with
and that was such a big thing in this episode. Like, they wanted to
was.
track down the doctor. They wanted to find out what the stars said. And they thought that by reviewing his tapes, they'd get those answers. And then we're introduced to a whole bunch of weird, interesting situations and flashbacks.
I was going to say, did anyone who was looking at the astral plane, does anyone here watch the OA?
No.
Haven't had a chance to yet.
So there's other things in the astral plane, and it was interesting seeing the two different shows take on the same experience, and actually like vastly similar, even though one was done very much in the style that the show has, which is the quasi 70s filmmaking. look.
Yeah, and also James Wan's Insidious has the character who very much like the devil, yellow-eyed demon, has the red-faced man who tries to take over the kid in the astral plane. And that totally reminds me of the same sort of horror that's invoked when like they're following him in the astral plane in Insidious.
Yeah.
It was very similar to what's going on.
Yeah, and I think and obviously this is a really important aspect of David's character and his abilities and how he actually came to be the way he is today in the episode, kind of broken and lost and ends up in an insane asylum. And I find that really interesting as you go and you meet Oliver and what's he doing in the astral plane? Like, I want to know that story, because then you find out, oh, his wife's been Bird's been keeping his body,
frozen.
Like
keeping
a
his body
Steve
preserved.
Zozo, like-
Right. So what happened to him? Yeah, in a big, heavy diver suit. So something happened to him, yet he has the ability to also be in the plane. Now, was he trapped there?
Right.
Like, did somebody throw him in there? Did he do it himself?
Well, it
You know?
reminds me a lot of in Ant-Man, where Ant-Man goes into that extra like plane when he shrinks down so much that he's in another place.
Right.
How if you think about how the Wasp did that and she got lost, but he had to like find a way back. That scene with David and Oliver like made me think of that and how David had to like get out of it through later on with what happened to Lenny.
Right. And I find it interesting that Oliver seems to have ability to create a space so that really it could just be David in that space. As you saw with the yellow-eyed demon being trapped outside this ice box, so to speak, you know, as they're in there and they're having this conversation. So in my head, I'm like, what kind of person is Oliver and what kind of history does he have? Because I know they mentioned before, and I was unsure, maybe you ladies can clarify, was he a mutant or not?
Well, I think
Did they ever
I think he's just not
acknowledge
an
that?
Omega, because
He's just not Omega.
I think what we're seeing with that space, like as cool as it is that he's got his little like ice chest where he can perform beat poetry with himself. But I think what we're seeing is like, because in Summerland, he's in the same kind of space, and he's like, oh, that's the one thing I can't beat is the cold. So he is kind of. Even in this astral plane, he's still laced to his actual circumstances, whereas David is, of course, just like hopping through the astral plane fields, and it seems like it's someplace that Oliver needs to return. Are we going to talk later about what it might mean, or like who might be in the astral plane, or? I
think we should talk after I'm curious about what's going on the outside of the world. Like while all this is happening on the astral plane. Right, the investigation that's going on outside with Sid and the history there and what they're looking for.
Yeah, so they end up going and tracking down David's ex-girlfriend to kind of figure out what she knew, what sort of sense she got about David. And that was a very interesting scene because she kind of was like, they're watching. Yeah. And they're able to get a memory of the lighthouse where the doctor is. And they start following that lead. And I don't know if you guys caught the detail, but I know a lot of people online did as well. Her earrings match the rings that David goes up into Oliver's lair. It's really weird. Like, how are all these things connected? Because I don't think these are coincidences.
There seems to be too much detail in this show for things to kind of be let go, which at the same time could drive someone crazy. Because at the point, does this mean something? Does that mean something? And they could just be like, no, you know, be funny. They're gonna think this means so much.
And something that we also heard on the message boards about that memory of the doctor is whether the memory of her going and visiting the doctor with his face after a savage beating that left him in a coma, we hear reference later, whether that was an image that was maybe implanted by the eye. We're wondering if the eye has the ability to plant false memories.
Right.
And
because it was a trap. They were led there to the weird
like
Willy Wonka
lighthouse.
like Candyland lighthouse.
Yeah, and going back to what you were saying about the doctor having a beating, we find out in this episode that David beat the crap out of him, was really violent.
Or was reported to.
Or was reported to.
Yeah.
And Sydney doesn't want to believe that, and we're starting to question what David is projecting to those around him versus what actually happened. And he's building a lot of fake memories and hiding the real ones behind it.
Right. And I think that and I think that really we'll just go back. We can go back to talking about David and the astral, because that's such a heavy part about who is making him. Why is he losing these parts of his memory? Why are these constantly getting cut out and messed with? And it always seems to happen in a way that's protecting David from himself.
It's like he's building
in a
up
way.
these walls as he goes, as
Exactly.
he's running from something that we're led to believe is the big demon.
The yellow-eyed demon,
yellow-eyed demon.
which, and I know, Liz, you've talked about it a lot already, with it being the Shadow King.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think with the huge press on the astral plane, I think that's really strong evidence that could be a strong possibility, like that in the future.
Well, and something we were discussing before we aired today is that particularly the role that Xavier had in imprisoning Shadow
Right.
King in the astral plane. So then people are out there postulating, is Oliver
Is
then
Oliver
also
then?
the Shadow King? He's dressed in yellow.
Yeah.
What's going on with that? And then the absence of color then for the angriest little boy, and the fact that now he's appearing to Sid in real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think goes back to their connection. When they switched bodies, there seemed to be some sort of something
Like
left
remnants,
behind.
yeah.
A remnant of one or the other. Now I'm interested in what means what. Is
Yeah.
is the yellow-eyed demon really the danger, or is it the angry little boy?
Or if you go back to what Lenny said in the episode before this, that bitch's secrets has secrets.
Right.
Have secrets. And it made me wonder, like, she's really interested in David, and David seems really similar to Oliver. So what if Oliver's the danger that is actually going to be presenting itself?
Right. Like,
And
what if Melanie Bird's not a good character?
What if she's not a good person?
Yeah.
And-
And it's such an interesting. I didn't know which one I was following more. What was going on with the group, with Sid and them when they were with the trap that happened there, and to have that turnaround, was that an implanted memory? More looking at the eye and seeing his powers and seeing what he can do, which was, I'm still a little confused on what he can and can't do. Is he a powerful telepath that can manipulate memories? And it seems like there's like 3 or 4 that are just powerful telepaths that can do things like that.
Well,
do you
and what did he do to Ptolemy at the end of the
Yeah.
episode? Because all of a sudden one of his eyes went milky white. So is he similar to Sid almost? And when he touches people, he swaps with them? Because that's a physical trait. And something that Melanie intimated way back in episode 2, I think, is that the eye used to be a dude named Walter around there.
Right.
And it seemed like they were saying he has something to do with what happened to Oliver.
Yeah. See, now, and that goes to push that I think that Oliver may have been trapped there, killed, or I'm so interested now. I want to know what's going on with Oliver. That's what I'm
know.
curious about, that history, because it's obviously a huge chunk.
Yeah.
It's obviously a huge chunk.
Although Oliver doesn't seem too concerned with what happened to him. He's more concerned about whether or not women are wearing bras or not in the modern
Well,
day.
he's been in there for a long time.
Yeah.
And karaoke, yeah.
And karaoke, yeah. Wednesdays are
Karaoke would get pretty old after the 60s.
Yeah, oh my gosh.
You know, one story I want to talk about is Carrie and Cary.
Carrie and Cary, yeah.
Now, I thought that I was really happy they expanded on that relationship and what their power was and what their history and story was. I thought it was really sweet. I really liked that.
Yeah, I really liked that too, and I thought it was interesting how they presented like their backstory to us, and it was so endearing. Of course, it was endearing, and you're kind of like wrapping your head around, okay, so this kid who was born and then like a separate sibling comes out, like what?
But and what was interesting is I think, did Sid point out, who was the person that pointed out? Yeah, Sid, that when she was telling the story, she was telling it from the perspective of male Cary.
Right. Yeah.
But then she was also talking about having Native American parents.
Yeah.
And so therefore that's actually a Cary story, right? I mean, a female Cary story.
See, and that's the question. That's what Sid asked. Is like, okay, but how do you feel about it? You know, and with that, I mean, sharing a body with another person, they really made you kind of care about these two and see their connection and how it's like, wow, that's why she's so much younger. She doesn't age outside of the Cary's body.
Yeah.
So
no, she ages outside of his body, but while
Only
she's
then,
only then.
There you go. That makes more sense.
Yeah, she's so much younger.
She is, and they've had that trade-off of him being, and even he was born small, And that's why his father left, abandoned his mother, and that she was really the one that protected him as they were growing up. And I don't know, this
And now
episode...
they're both like having these, in the episode, it felt like they were representative of something bigger than just their characters. Because he was very much like the logic, and she was very passionate. So it's almost like an ego and id sort of scenario.
Well, and what's interesting is for people who are still out there on the message boards that are like, is Sid real? Is she not real? I don't know if we're dealing with this relationship showing us what could be going on with David and Sid, where sometimes female Carrie is outside of him and sometimes she lives inside of him. So it seems like the only character thus far that's paralleled any of David's anything, right? Like outside of his telepathy, which is shared by a couple of other people.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because we're like left to wonder who's real, who's not real. Yeah. And they introduced the fact that apparently David's dog never existed.
Right.
Right.
And then he was called King.
And and there's all these connection tidbits of also that Lenny was a man.
Yeah.
And like was actually a man, and this was from the viewpoint of the girlfriend.
Yeah, the girlfriend and the sister, I think, right?
Exactly. They acknowledged that there was no girlfriend
girl,
acknowledged.
There's no Lenny. It was
girlfriend acknowledged no dog. And then, girlfriend acknowledged that there was no girl. It was actually a male friend, a large fat guy.
Yeah.
And then that the sister acknowledged that there was no dog.
Yeah.
And the sister, and the predicament that she's in right now, I think is really...
It's really intense.
With
really
Dr. Kissinger as her cellmate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love the way they shot this scene. When they showed her, and I was unclear of whether, is that a stone wall and they're just showing it?
It's
oh, no, it's like the glass.
They are glass walls, right?
The breathing holes.
Right, and I just love the way they shot that. And,
it's beautiful.
And it's really interesting. And why are they, I get that they want to keep her there, but you just feel like they're starving her. Yeah. Does she really? She had an idea that her brother had some sort of ability.
Well, and then she copped to it.
Yeah.
When she talked to Kissinger, and she was
they
like,
both did. They were like, he'd show up in random places and.
And I think this episode really hit hard on the relationships between different people. Yeah. And I mean, you saw it obviously with the two Carries, and then you see even the relationship between Bird and Oliver, and how she's still keeping his body preserved and alive because of the love they have, you would assume, I didn't hope love, and that relationship and what keeps them both kind of going. And then you see the relationship that happened between Sid and David, and how she wants to think that he's a good guy, that he didn't really do these things. Right. She's hoping that what she sees him as is the real deal. But you start to question that when all of a sudden you realize, oh, David's, for whatever reason, outside of his control, has changed things, altered reality in some way.
Even weirdly, the relationship between Amy and David, and now that she and Kissinger, who are two people who either had a role in getting him to the hospital or keeping him in the hospital, are now kind of living a similar experience where they're being confined somewhere, and it's an interesting thing seeing them both these two very put together people who were a symbol of the people that were maybe the most stable. Now being the people who are unfurling in a confined space.
Right.
Yeah, and it totally says a lot that these two people had inklings that David wasn't crazy, and they still chose to protect him from that fact in a really weird, twisted way.
Or protect themselves,
and
right? Because do you want, if you've given your life over to make people better, who are dealing with make people better, however you fall on that idea, but and then someone is sitting across from you and they make you feel like you're crazy, right? Or his sister being this stolid anchor and always having the brother that was like a little bit off, and then all of a sudden you realize you've been wrong and He's
whole
been
time.
rotting somewhere.
And now you're in a cage, and you don't even. It has a weird slide seat thing, and people are watching you, and you can't do anything about it, and you're hungry. I mean, she scarfed down that
Whatever that was,
junior high lunch. It was intense.
It probably was junior high lunch.
The
That's torture.
The last scene, though, what I love was with the way they opened up the show, having that little flashback, and then we got to see everything at the end and kind of all come together. And it was just like one of those moments where you're like, whoa, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the immediate introduction of like Sid being in danger in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly.
And it teased like, hey, don't worry, we're not going to stay in the astral plane for too long.
But actually, I liked the astral plane. Yeah. I'm a big Jermaine Clement and Dan Stevens fan, and I was like, I can just hang out with them in that astral plane for hours. This whole episode could have just been
in their little ice hotel room. Yeah.
Wives and avocados and whatever else he was saying.
It could have been, but thankfully it wasn't. In my opinion, I'm glad it wasn't, only because that was such a great scene. When the turnaround came, there's the eye. All of a sudden, all these SWAT dudes show up and they start opening fire.
One of the notes that I wrote down was that he does a Charles Xavier thing with his touching his head and his hand. Oh my gosh.
Trying to use his abilities.
Yeah. How do I get this to work?
Yeah, how do you get this to work? Exactly. But where was
Lenny tapped into his rage. And
and he tapped into his rage, and which ended up him appearing at the end of this huge fight scene that involved a team of SWATs, and the eye just walking through bullets. Didn't even phase him.
Right.
Didn't even phase him, which I think again shows how powerful he is. And then with Carrie going balls out, just beating the crap out of people.
Well, and
it was great.
At first, it seemed like she was maybe impervious to bullets when she was downstairs. Like she wasn't running out of the room either.
She was just
like sauntering casually up the stairs, and then she was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna go hop out of this window and beat some people up."
She jumps out a window and then proceeds to fight. And I thought what was cool was they showed the connection between the two Carries too, because as she was fighting,
the choreography of that whole sequence was insane.
Bill Irwin nailed it too.
Yeah, and that was great. They both got to go back. I was like, is this a dance? Is it not? And it was really cool to see that, and the way they shot that was awesome. But then when you start seeing Carrie lose in a very bad way, oh man, that was,
because he doesn't even have sight. He can just feel it.
He can just feel it. And imagine that you're close enough with someone where you can feel everything like that. And then of course we have with Sid being able to switch bodies with the eye. Which was a great save.
Idea. Yeah.
Great save, Sid. Good job. And I love the way they showed that, though. Even with their hands getting close, I just love the way they showed that.
The two planets that Brooke was so in love with, the image of almost like two planets coming together. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's so cool. No, she's losing her mind about that.
Oh my God. Internally, just like.
So we're down 2 teammates in this episode.
I hope not.
And we don't know the thing that we were just
Carrie got shot on the shoulder over here. I was almost like, she'll be fine. She'll be okay.
Well, is it shoulder or is it chest?
I
think they left it ambiguous enough.
It wasn't like right in the middle where you're like, oh, they're screwed.
So either chapter 5 is going to open with her in an ER bed.
Right.
With vapor around her, of course. It'll never just open like a regular
Everyone's going to be frozen, you guys. Like, they're almost dead. Not completely dead.
And I want to say that I thought it was great how David got back to that place.
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of preventive of what made all of that happen. And he's stuck in the astral plane.
Yeah.
He's talking with, I keep saying Lenny. He's talking
Lenny,
with
Benny.
Lenny. Good, Ben. Yeah, exactly. There it is. That's why I keep getting confused with it. There's 2 names. So he's talking with Lenny, and she starts to.
She taps into very Tyler Durden too, in a way.
Yeah, and starts to turn him and really push him and say, okay, now you got to get angry, because there's what I like so much is that she has these moments where she's afraid. She's afraid that he doesn't need her to do, and at least that's the vibe I'm getting, which makes me think that him being able to create a dog in his mind is like, oh, there was a dog. He probably did the same thing, creating the imaginary friend or somebody always there to protect him.
See, and I think that's a case that supports King being the Shadow King, and possibly Lenny, even though I'm still not sold on that theory, but. There was a good, it's either red herring or it's something that we're going to look back on and be like, oh, doy. Is when Lenny says, like, we need to get out of here. I have things I need to do.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And
because
what does that mean?
It doesn't seem like David's super motivated internally to do much of anything in the real world, right? Like, it's the reason the astral plane, no matter where he is, he's having a battle with himself, right?
Yeah.
And something Oliver says is like, maybe it's good that you're here so you can work it out. And then all of a sudden Lenny goes like, no, we need to bust out of here right now. So either Lenny's trying to get out to create some dastardly business with him, or Oliver's trying to keep him there. So it even more supports the great battle that we're having as viewers about who's the bad guy and who's the good guy, or if it's all bad guys.
Right. Yeah. And Lenny makes the acknowledgement that I am you. You are me.
Exactly.
We are we. Like that. So that
anyone you
like,
want to be.
They're the same person. Exactly.
That's just like in Fight Club, because in like Fight Club, the narrator is very much like David, like kind of like fighting for like self-actualization and trying to figure out what they want to do. And Tyler Durden's like, I have to do Project Mayhem. I got to keep you out of here. I gotta do this. Yeah. So it's kind of like how Benny is operating at the same time. She takes care of business, maybe.
Yeah, and seems to be that person. When things get serious, you run to me. Don't act like that's not what happened. So I like that vibe.
Yeah, totally.
And again, I just love the casting. I love the casting for this
Aubrey
show.
Plaza is insane. I love her.
She's doing a great job in this, and I just love the way she antagonizes and she has a little bit of fear, but then she puts on the tough girl act right off the bat and pushes him. He ends up getting out of the astral plane, teleporting himself into the middle of the woods, in the middle of the road, and he looks like he's ready to do battle with this van that's being driven by Sid in the body of the eye, and
carrying the eye in the body of Sid in the back.
Exactly, and it's like,
of course, you're like, oh man, I can just see this unfold, and it happens. He goes and he thinks that Sid is Sid and not the eye in Sid's body, and then starts attacking the eye, who's actually Sid, and you're just like, shit.
Yeah, you just see it all kind of crumble. And
I'm
sure
glad
enough,
her
Carrie
aim
gets
is
shot.
good enough to where she got the knife out of her own hand,
right?
but she didn't have to hit herself with a crowbar. I was like,
you
no.
knock yourself out.
I really thought she was gonna. I'm like, is she gonna shoot herself? Because that's intense.
That's
like
intense.
that's gonna happen.
That's
but
some commitment.
No, it's great. Yeah, she nailed her with herself with the crowbar. That was awesome. And then Carrie gets shot, and that was interesting. Obviously, the eye gets away, and so now going into the next episode, like, what is that?
Well, the eye was just standing there, right? Like after he shoots.
No, he took off.
He took off.
He ran.
Yeah, and
you blinked again.
I blinked.
You blinked again.
Stop doing that.
Because I missed. I was like, oh, this episode. Like, I think the theory that it is Shadow King, that it's not Mojo supported, because we didn't see Mojo-esque yellow-eyed demon anywhere, and then you're like, oh no,
he was
totally
there.
escape.
Yeah, tiny little legs, super fat body, little arms.
Oh wow.
Weird.
That was so intense. It was such a great episode. I was actually really excited because when I was reading the credits, tonight's episode was directed by Larissa Kondracki, female director, which is really cool.
Who'd done a bunch of Walking Dead.
Yeah, Walking Dead.
And The Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's so cool to see like genre.
And a totally different writer. It was both of their first time with the show, so it's. I mean, with the incredible style of the show, it's amazing. I mean, 2 and 3 were by the same directing and writing team, but the fact that they just are able to keep switching people out like this, and that it's being done so successfully, while keeping the same, it feels like the same sense of storytelling.
Yeah, totally. And we're still just being kept guessing, honestly. Like, do I know what's going to happen next week? I have no idea.
But in a weird way, it did feel like the most linear episode so far. And saying that, it did do the memento thing, where it's like, hey, this is happening in the beginning and switching it out on you. But I thought even with that, it was really, really good and still kept to the trippiness that Legion is going down. I loved it.
Awesome. And so I think we've talked out this whole episode. Oh my gosh, like my brain feels like it's done like a workout. And where can everyone find you online?
So I am at Liz Finning on Twitter, and that's please feel free also to live tweet in with us. I won't be here next week. I'll be in Prague, but I will be back the following week. But I'll be trying to tweet and watch the episode with you guys. I'm going to be bugging you guys next week, or when Brooke's back with you.
There you go.
Right.
And then there's me. Maybe. Yes. Hey, there's me. So I'm Ray. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out with us. You can find me on Twitter at RayDallas67. Also on Instagram. I only have one more than you. It's not a big deal. At Ray Holdridge. Hi, Mom. I'm sorry if I've embarrassed you this evening. I love you.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at Sabina Has No R. I'm also a host on the Supergirl and the Flash After Show, so I'll see you next week. And the Legion team will also be back as well.
Yes, I'll be here. Woo.
Have a good night.
Thanks for hosting us, Mama.
Yay.
Bye.
Thanks.